Hello, happy May! Where is this year going? If this is the first video of mine you are seeing, hello, welcome, thank you for joining me. My name's Vicky, I work in children's publishing. I am very into books, mostly fantasy, middle grade, adventure, but I'll try a bit of everything, and I just enjoy sharing what I've been reading recently. I'm also really into nature and walking and crafts, and I've started making videos about those as well, so go and check them out after this one if they sound like your kind of thing. First up in April I read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper. This is one of those classics that loads of people studied at school, but I didn't, so I am catching up on my classics and I thought I would give this one a go. In this novel we follow Scout, a young girl who is the daughter of a lawyer in the deep south of the US in the 1930s? Yes, in the 1930s. They live in a small town. She spends most of her time with her older brother and one of their friends who comes to visit in the summer holidays. And ostensibly we're just following Scout and her brother as they go around the town, see all the people that live nearby, get up to their little mischievous childhood adventures. But there's also a bigger plot going on here because their father ends up defending a black man in a rape case against a young white woman. So you end up looking at race and injustice and all these big issues through the eyes of a very bright but still very young child. And that's a very interesting take, and I thought this was done well and written well, but I couldn't fully enjoy it. My main thing with this is one of the best known books about race and racial injustice, and it was written by a white woman. And I get that at the time maybe black authors weren't being published, maybe they didn't have as much opportunity, which is a problem in and of itself, but if this book made a difference, if this got people talking about race, then that's a good thing. But the problem comes in the fact that Atticus, Scout's father, the lawyer, very much feels like the white man who's come to save the day. The black characters in this book feel like side characters. All the white characters, we learn about their personalities. There are lots of conversations they have with each other, they have with Scout. We get to know them quite well. The black people in this book pop up when they need to for the plot. And that makes me uncomfortable. They don't have much time for you to get to know their personalities. They don't really have stories of their own, they just pop up so that Atticus can be like, we must respect our neighbours just because they're not like us, which, fine. But when we come to the rape case, it very much feels like this nice, clever white man is going to save the day because this black man has got himself into a situation and only the nice white man can get him out of it. And I don't love that. So ultimately, I think it's good writing, and I think probably this book needed to happen at the time that it was published. But I had a look, and this is still on the GCSE syllabus for English, in England at least, and I really don't think it needs to be. I think if you want a book that talks about these issues, find a novel to swap it for that has been written by a person of colour. I really don't think we need to be giving so much attention now to a book about a white saviour written by a white woman. There were a few things I did like about this. Really enjoyed the image towards the end of Scout dressed as a ham. Against sort of the darker things going on in this book, she just turns up dressed as a ham for some village show, and that was fun. Atticus as a dad, given when this is set, is really unconventional. He's very chill. He teaches Scout to read. He thinks she should be able to do stuff that her brother's doing. He felt like, it's a very different book. If anyone has read the middle grade Rooftoppers by Catherine Rundell, he feels very much like the dad in that, very quirky, very like, I'm going to be friends with my child, I'm going to respect them, I'm going to let them do what they want, and I'm just gonna be there to support them and pick them up when they fall over. So Atticus as a dad I really liked. And next I picked up Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I read Embroideries last month, and someone in the Farringdon area of London is clearly binging all of her books, because the same charity shop where I found Embroideries had this book in the other week, so I thought I had to keep the theme going. This is a compilation of, I think, 4 comics, graphic novels about her childhood and her young adulthood. She grew up in Iran in the 80s when it was going through the Islamic Revolution, which is a period of history that I know horribly little about. Thankfully I know a bit more now that I've read this. Her parents were quite radically Marxist and against everything that was being put on the Iranian people, so they were out protesting, and she grew up in this household full of political debate and outspokenness, and grew up as this very intelligent, opinionated child, seeing all of this unfolding around her throughout her childhood. She later moved to Europe for her safety, and we follow her experience living in this completely different culture and being seen as this child who's escaped from Iran, and the culture shocks and the way that affected her family and how she grew up. And it's just a really fascinating look into her culture and what was going on in Iran through these decades, but also just her own story growing up, finding herself, her relationships, and sort of settling into the adult she would eventually become after several different versions of herself that she tried on for a while. I remember growing up and I didn't really pay attention to the news because I wasn't interested, and when I did listen it all sounded quite scary. And I remember hearing people talking about Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and I just got it into my head that bad things were going on, and that's all I knew. And as I said, I don't know enough about that part of the world and their history, and this book was really eye-opening. The things that people had to deal with, the way their lives were restricted, the things they could and couldn't do, the places they weren't allowed to be without being questioned. It just sounds like it was a really horrible time to grow up. And the art style of this is very bold and it is comic strippy more than graphic novel, I would say, and it means that she can show the protests and the violence and the torture from when people were put into prison for their political beliefs, and that's all horrifying, but something about it being in this format means it's a lot more accessible. I think if this content had been in a non-fiction book or a novel, I'd have been less inclined to pick it up. But something about her art style means it's no less shocking, but it's easier to take in and process. And I think she balances it really well. All the horrific stuff that went on is sort of balanced with funny stories and strange things she thought as a child, and joyous moments, the way that she and her friends and her parents found moments to enjoy life and each other's company and have fun even when everything around them was trying to stop them. I think this is a very important book, and it has taught me a lot but also highlighted how much I don't know, and I think that's one of the best things books can do. For some contrast, after reading that, I needed something a little bit lighter. I listened to The Theory of Everything Else. This is a non-fiction book by Dan Schreiber, who is a writer, radio producer, comedian, and he co-hosts No Such Thing as a Fish, the Fact podcast. So if you're into that podcast, this book is the same sort of approach to non-fiction. This book is a collection of stories he's collected from history from around the world about conspiracy theories, weird beliefs, faux scientific research, and just all the strange things people have come up with and convinced themselves and sometimes other people are true when from the outside they're quite clearly not. We've got things like Titanic theories, how it wasn't an iceberg that sunk the Titanic, it was all the time travellers from the future travelling back to the ship at the same time to watch it sink and their weight sinking the ship. We've got conspiracy theories about aliens, plants having feelings and telepathy, teaching dolphins to speak English, homeopathy, all sorts of bizarre things. And I really enjoyed this. I love science, I love silly, weird things, so this worked well for me. His writing style is really fun. You can tell he does podcasts and radio. It's very chatty, very accessible, everything's explained well. And this book I think could quite easily be sort of making fun of people for their beliefs, for getting things wrong, but it's all done very affectionately. You can tell that Dan Schreiber really loves finding out about these things. He really enjoys the research. He's gone out to interview people about their science, about their alien encounters, and it's all done. You can really feel how much he loves it. He points out when people believe things that were dangerous or just completely wrong, but if someone's just a bit wacky and they're just doing their research in their shed and they're not harming anyone, he will say that they're wrong and he will explain why they are wrong, but it is all done in good humour and with a lot of affection. And this does feel like a podcast. If you don't get very much time to listen to audiobooks in one go and you can't quite settle into a novel, the chapters of this work like episodes of a podcast. So if you're looking for something for on your drive or when you're doing the washing up, this would probably be a fun one. I can't get through a whole month without reading some fantasy, so next was The Mermaid, the Witch and the Sea by Maggie Tokuda-Hall. In this book we follow the pirate Florian and the Lady Evelyn, who is a highborn, fancy imperial lady. She ends up on Florian's ship. She thinks she is travelling to meet her new husband in a different part of the world, but it's not a passenger ship. Florian is a pirate and the crew have different intentions for their passengers. Our two main characters very quickly form this bond, and when things start to go wrong, they decide they need to bail and their story goes on from there. I picked this up because I googled books that feel like Our Flag Means Death, and I'm not sure this does. It's got a pirate ship and it's got a queer romance at the centre of it, but it didn't have the humour of Our Flag Means Death. It didn't have the found family vibes, and I think that's really what I was going for. So perhaps this wasn't the book I wanted it to be, but I did like the premise of this. I liked how this book looked at gender. Florian isn't always Florian. Florian is also Flora, and she explores both sides of herself through the book, and I appreciated that. I liked the relationship between the two main characters. I thought they were sweet together. Their chemistry worked for me. I did think though that the middle section of this, where the witch part comes in, didn't really affect the story as much as it should. There's this big build-up where Flora is learning some things that feel like they're going to come into play, and they just sort of act as convenient ways to solve a couple of problems towards the end of the book, and then it's kind of done. And I think those problems could have been overcome in a different way. It's hard to explain without spoiling it, but if you've read this, I just felt like the plot wasn't quite as tight as I'd have liked. Possibly she was trying to do too many things at once, trying to do sort of character studies and looking at this gender exploration and doing ocean mermaid lore, and also witches, and also romance, and also this sort of political thing going on in the background, and it just felt a little bit muddled and a little bit slow. This one actually started, I think, in February and then left for a while. I think it just needed some tightening up, but if you love a pirate story, if you want a romance with a slightly different setup, then ta-da! Next, I continued my campaign of catching up with a series of unfortunate events. I talked last month about how I read the first book, having never read anything in the series before. I've watched the film, but I thought it was time to read the books. And so this month I listened to book 2 in the series, which is The Reptile Room. I read a physical copy of The Bad Beginning, but this month I started with the audiobook, which is narrated by Tim Curry, and I loved listening to him. That made the book so much more fun. In this book, the Baudelaire orphans Violet, Klaus and Sunny, who in the last book escaped from Count Olaf, who is after all their money and is a terrible evil man, and they have been sent to live with their uncle. I think he's one of those uncles that you call uncle, but he's not an uncle. Anyway, Montgomery, who is one of the world's leading herpetologists. He is a snake expert. And if you are about the same age as me and you watch The Wild Thornberrys growing up, Tim Curry's voice for Uncle Monty is pretty much exactly the voice he did for Nigel Thornberry in that show, and there was all the nostalgia, and that made me very happy. And I said last month that a couple of things about the style of this series niggled at me, the way words are explained all the time, and just something about the style, the if only they knew that things were going to get much worse from here, and reader, if you like a happy ending, shut this book. In the first book, once it had happened a few times, I was like, yeah, no, I get what you're going for, that's cute, but does it need to come up so often? And I don't know whether it was listening to it in this book or whether he did cut down on it a bit now that had been set up, but it didn't bother me as much in this one. And I liked the writing in this second book more. And there's more of a mystery to solve in this one because, spoiler alert, things don't go well for Uncle Monty, and possibly Count Olaf is back on the scene, and so it's more of the kids finding out what happened and then trying to make the grown-ups believe what happened. And I liked this one. I thought after the first one I'd maybe try a couple more and just get a taste of the series, but now I've done this one and now I've heard Tim Curry reading it, and they're all very short anyway. I think I'm going to keep going with the series. Another tone shift. After a sort of spooky middle grade, why not go for a sci-fi romance? This is Impossible by Sarah Lotz. I think possibly in America it's called The Impossible Us, but either way, this is a sci-fi romance about Nick and Bee, who meet when Nick's email goes to Bee by accident. It was meant for someone else. It's a very angry email. They get chatting, and a romance unfolds. But things are not what they seem, and when Nick and Bee decide to take things to the next step and meet, they realise that something is going on. And this book is so hard to talk about without spoiling things, and the whole sci-fi element of this is kind of a huge spoiler. So, to speak vaguely, there is something stopping them from meeting, and it changes the dynamic and the future of their relationship. And it means that they each set out to try and change some things in their lives. This is so hard to talk about without ruining the twist, but I will summarise it as a love story, a romance with some big sci-fi obstacles for this couple to deal with. This book, I know it's a sci-fi, but primarily it's a romance. It's over 400 pages long. I don't think it needed to be that long. There were some bits in the middle where it slowed down quite a lot. There was quite a lot of just people talking. Nick and Bee communicate by email, and there were a lot of emails, and a lot of it was just them sort of bantering and talking about their relationship. I struggle with a fictional relationship, whether that's in a show or in a book or a film, whatever, when they don't actually talk about much. They don't talk about what they have in common, they don't share much. Their conversations are all about each other and their relationship, and that's how this one felt after the first few chapters. They talk about their jobs quite a lot, they're very supportive of each other's careers, and that's lovely. But apart from the fact that they both like David Bowie, they don't talk much about anything of substance. And given how long this book is, I really feel like they could have shared more, just a few more things. It didn't need to be anything huge, just a few more things that bring them together, because they quite quickly get to this point of, we're soulmates, we're meant to be, I'd do anything for you, and we're gonna make our love work because you're the most important thing to me, when they're mostly running on David Bowie and good banter. And I did like the way they talked to each other, but it just felt like a lot to be like, this is my person, when they don't have a huge amount to build that on. I also didn't love Nick. I felt like we got to know Bea a bit better. There's more about her past and sort of the way she looks at the world, and she had more of a personality. Nick is kind of self-pitying. His life has gone a bit wrong. His career isn't where he wants it to be. His marriage at the start of the book is not going well. But he admits that that's his fault. He says he hasn't really tried, he's just sort of let things go, he's let himself and his career go, and he's just quite mopey. And I know people feel like that, but just to read about, I needed something, if that's who he's going to be as a character, I needed something else about him. I needed him to be really passionate about something else, or to have some interest, or just something that stopped him just being a middle-aged man who's like, everything is terrible. It also made it quite hard to believe he'd go in so hard for this new romance, although maybe middle-aged men having a crisis do that. But just to go from this marriage where he's like, nothing's wrong, I just can't be bothered, to being like, you are my soulmate and I would do anything for you. He just didn't quite work, in my opinion. But to look at the positives, their dialogue, their interactions all felt pretty natural. There are some great side characters and some lovely moments in this, and it was a really interesting take on a romance novel. I really liked the combination of sci-fi and romance. The setup of this was all really fun. I just think it was too long. Nick needed more personality. Maybe the ending was a bit rushed. But if you like romance but you're kind of bored of standard contemporary romance, or if you like sci-fi and you've never read romance before, this is probably a good middle ground. Just don't read it when you're feeling like you need something super pacey. And my last book of the month was Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a magical detective mystery novella with a sapphic romance at the centre. Our main character is a magical detective living in possibly historical Chicago, possibly alternative Chicago, I can't remember. Her time is limited. I won't say why, but her time is running out, as in we're talking days, and she wants more time with the love of her life, so she takes on a particularly dangerous job, which will hopefully sort things out for her and stop a murderer. This is, not to spoil things, this is divine fantasy. There's some sort of wizardry magic going on, but a lot of it is angels and demons type magic fantasy-ness, and I enjoyed that. I tend to go more for the sort of witch and fairy type fantasy, but this was really interesting. And the other month I read a couple of novellas and I said that both of them felt like excerpts from full novels or kind of draft experiments for full novels, and I felt like I didn't get as much out of them as I wanted. This one felt like how a novella should be. There were fewer characters than in the ones I read the other month, so you got to grips with everyone and their situation much quicker. And the story felt very self-contained. By the end of it, I was satisfied. Everything had happened that needed to happen. It's all within the space of a few days, but it did feel like a full story. And also the mystery and the fantasy elements were balanced really well with the romance. The relationship with the main character and her partner was beautiful and very sort of sincere and tender, and everything our main character does is driven by her desire for a better future for the two of them, and that came across really well. There were a couple of points where I had to go back and listen again, and I don't know whether that's because I think I can listen to an audiobook and do other stuff and I just zone out and then realise I haven't been listening. I don't know if it was completely that to blame. I think possibly some of the characters have quite similar names and there are points where suddenly a lot is happening and I just have to go back and be like, wait, no, I did hear that bit right. Okay, I missed that important thing and I thought that was a different person. I just had to clarify, but I don't know whether that was just me or whether that's something other people have found with this story. But generally this has made me feel a lot more positive about novellas, so I think I'm going to look out for a few more, and I'm also going to see if this author has done anything else, because I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. So that was my April. Not quite as many books as the last couple of months. Partly I was busier, partly I got into a little bit of a slump after reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I think I just had a lot of thoughts about it that I needed to process. But I will be back in a month or so to wrap you up on my books for May. In the meantime, I hope you have a lovely month, look after yourselves, and see you soon.